Ok, siamo pronti? Sì? Sì, ok. Benvenuti tutti a questo panel su Pirate Modernity. È un panel che si svolgerà in inglese e quindi fra pochi secondi switcherò all'inglese. Comunque ci sarà una serie di presentazioni dai partecipanti del panel che fra poco presenterò. Presentazioni abbastanza brevi, circa 10 minuti a persona, e per poi aprire un dibattito dove siete tutti cordialmente invitati a partecipare. Ovviamente nel dibattito voi potete porre le vostre domande e interventi in italiano, io vedo di tradurre a quei relatori che l'italiano non parlano, e così vediamo di facilitare un'interazione, diciamo, più partecipativa e più aperta possibile. Having said this, I'm now switching to English, and I would like to give a warm welcome to everybody who's come to participate in the debate this morning on modernity, and in particular to our the excellent speakers that we have been able to gather for this panel. We have with us Ravi Sundaram from the Institute for Development Studies and the Sarai project in Delhi, who is the man who coined the term pirate modernity, so to say, with a book that came out in 2009, and one of the sort of pioneering researchers in the world right now on the issue of information society from below, street-level innovation, information technology, bricolage, etc., around the world. We also have with us Moitrey Dekka, who's from the Delhi School of Economics, but presently a PhD student at the University of Milano, who does similar research right now in Delhi on markets for computer games, pirated computer games, and sort of recycled, bricolaged computer gaming consoles and technology. We're also very happy to have with us Jaromil, who makes his own money. That's what you do right now. He's now the leader of the Dindi project and the Free Coin project, which is an... Oh, you're Marcus, you're a participant of the Dindi project. And right now he's working on Free Coin, which is open source Bitcoin, as I understand. Maybe you can describe it that way, right? Jaromil is a famous hacker and information society activist and pundit around alternative visions of information technology. We also have with us Carlo Iorio, who has a very interesting project on recycling technological wastes and bringing technological waste to developing countries, and he's going to give us a presentation on that. And Alessandro Delfanti, finally, who's a researcher at McGill University in Canada and works on open science, and in particular has published a book that just came out in Italian on open source biotech. And finally, this panel will be moderated by Alex Giordano, who probably does not need much in ways of a presentation. Alex Giordano is a well-known cultural personality in Italy and a pioneering expert on social media marketing, and co-author with me right now of the book Societing Reloaded, that attempts to explore new forms of innovation and new forms of development within the information economy. And finally, my name is Adam Arvidsson, and I'm a professor at the University of Milano, where I teach sociology, and I also work with Alex Giordano on the Societing project. So, without much ado, I'm going to leave over to the speakers, and before the speakers have been asked to give fairly quick and concise presentations on their take on this general term, pirate modernity. Some of them will be projecting images, which I trust that the organizers will arrange in some way. And at this point, I'm very honored to pass over the microphone to Ravi Sundaram. Please.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here in this wonderful old city, and to also meet friends who I'm meeting after 10 years. So it's a very important moment for me. I'd now like to have the first image, please. I hope this works. I've always done it on my own. Okay, let me tell you what it is before it comes up. The first image, yeah, here it is. Here it is. So what you see before you is really the story of something that has fundamentally changed, structurally, culturally changed in the last 30 years. 30 years ago, say before 1980, there's a story of the West, there was a story of the South, there's a story of the East, North, South. This is the endless story that I grew up with. Development, underdevelopment, and what to do about it. Something structurally changed around 1980, at least in my life, and I would say across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and probably all over the world. What you see is essentially by the 1980s, the structure of cities all over the non-Western world began changing. The defined aspects of cities really began expanding. You know, Lagos is now one of the largest cities in the world, right? You could never imagine this. Most of the large cities are in the non-Western world. You had a huge expansion of cities, large expansion of informal populations, people without permanent work. You have them also in the West, right? This increasingly began to get mixed up with new forms of electronic infrastructure, new media infrastructure. This never happened before. Low-cost technologies, workshop factories, mixed up with informalization, weak governments, and the rules that had been set up in place after the colonial powers left, those rules got increasingly fuzzy. So what you had set up was a very, very interesting series of experiments. National borders were breached. Many of them were fictions, complete fictions. In Africa, they were complete fictions. Sovereignties became weak, but wonderful, interesting experiments and innovations took place. And remember, new technologies are coming in every day. Next, please. Yeah. Next. So what the first wave that I went through was cassette culture. What you have are images, very simple images of covers of audio cassettes. I don't know how many of you remember this word, audio cassettes. The audio cassette revolution in India was started really by small entrepreneurs who went to Taiwan and East Asia, got cheap rolling tape, built workshop factories. Remember, this is a new technology. The new conditions of possibility that began. You could set up things in your homes and workshops. There's an entrepreneur who started this revolution, smashed all the multinational companies. Multinational companies control 95% of the India's market, blackmailing artists, creating fictitious stars. That whole world came crumbling down. A whole new infrastructure was built. A new infrastructure, new artists. India has around 70 languages. Every language produced music. Soon the VHS came in, right? The VHS came in and set up its own world. So vast new ecologies, multiple ecologies started coming up. When the multinational companies ruled, they basically set rules of stardom, spectacles of stardom, who could rise. They controlled a few languages. So actually, new infrastructures, not based on property. None of this was based on property. None of them used copyright. They sold in the market. You did well, fine. But they were not interested in property. And everyone made money because there's, small bits of money. Next, please. Yeah. So this is the VCD revolution. So VCDs were not introduced in Europe because this is something Sony did for Asia. And it allowed cheap, inexpensive digital reproduction. Remember, this is pre-DVD and really pre-internet. To open up new possibilities. These are people who are getting trained in new forms of innovation, a new workshop and mechanical reproduction, right? Next, please. Yeah. So what you had in India, this is what I mean by borders began to break down. So the big media companies did not allow VHS cassettes of films to be released in India when films were released officially. So if a film was released in January, they would say, release the legal VHS cassette after 2 years. So you had a loop, a regional loop, right? So just to show you this, the film would be released in Dubai, go to Karachi overnight online. I found this out in a street market in Karachi, which has now been a very interesting street market, right? Go overnight to Delhi, go to the local cable network, which was set up really by small entrepreneurs. These are not big entrepreneurs, all small entrepreneurs who are hooking up cable, right? The cable network. No Time Warner, nothing. These are your neighborhood entrepreneurs, someone who's running a cafe, maybe on this piazza, who's setting up the cable network, right? In 48 hours, the film would show. You're seeing it on your television. It's playing in the hall, you're seeing it. And if you liked it, you saw it, went to the hall and saw it, right? So it was a loop. Borders were, this is intimating the internet in its most interesting way. It's rejection of property, transnational collaboration, and broadly, a mutual recognition of equals, right? Next, please. Yeah. So these two things you have to understand, at least in the world I knew, were mixed. One is media, the ability to make media and innovate within all forms of media, particularly digital media, and this is I've come to the 90s, mixed with informality. All new forms of informal production. People without, you can call it precarious labor, you can call, and this is part of a large, complex landscape that emerged in different parts of the world. And one of the most interesting parts of this world that I found interesting was its indifference to property. Property did not produce profit. New forms of circulation emerged and new forms of collaboration emerged. Next, please. This is a street market. So there were many complex hierarchies all over the world, and I'm sure this exists in Italy. Immigrants would be buying from street markets if they don't have online connections, right? So this is a typical street market for software, DVDs that exist in India. Now the very poor would buy from here. Next, please. This is a very large media market where I did field work, which has one of the largest software markets. So there were many bazaar cultures that came up all over Asia, all over Africa, and them in Latin America too. Next, please. Yeah. So what you had after 2000, I'm coming here because I can't see it properly. So what you had was a new wave of enforcement. Adam, tell me when I'm running out of time. Yeah. New wave of enforcement, where the large multinational media companies started attacking these new pirate infrastructures. Remember, media spread in the non-Western world, and I think in most parts of the world, it really expanded outside property networks, structures that have been designated as pirate, right? So you had media industries, having basically these cowboys who would go in and smash small shops. These are really small shop owners. They would go and smash the stuff, come with the police, get warrants, right? Then you had new forms of new multiplicities emerging. For example, this 24-hour cycle, they could never ever break it. Impossible to break it. Just as each major software release started getting cracks within 24 hours, in the same way, the street and neighborhood produced its own new forms of organization. So the cable network, for example, if you wanted to shut it down, impossible, because they set up parallel transponders all over the neighborhood, and people would collaborate. The entire neighborhood would collaborate, right? Next, please. Yeah. So very interestingly, when I went to China, I found the same hierarchy. So next, please. This is a street market. I went to a big bazaar in China, big bazaar recently. So the street market, outside the bazaar, is where used parts come. These are very, you don't need your computer. You don't need any peace. So there is no death. There is absolutely no death here. Everything moves and is constantly recirculated. It's broken up, reassembled, and recirculated. So hugely productive surplus that is emerging all. So this is where the very poor come. You don't have a part for something, you come and buy it here. Next, please. And this is the more sophisticated stuff, which is the Shanzhai market. The Shanzhai are basically suppliers for the international electronics market. They supply probably all your phones, DVD players, GPS players. These are manufacturers who are all over South China with extremely high levels of innovation, and most of them, regionally and internally, again, exactly like the people I looked at in India, don't work on a property basis. You set up a small workshop, you learn something, you get some skills, you move on, you set up another workshop. And they don't go around raiding each other and smashing each other. Extremely high levels of innovation and very, very artisan-like. So I found all kinds of small things which used to be designed for a small group of people. No mass production. Next, please. Okay, I think my images are over. So, so what you have very interestingly in this world is the possibility that you can produce, organize, and innovate outside property. Property is not fundamental to it. And remember, this is not outside the market, but really, these are practices within a bazaar form of materiality, right? So what we need to think about is if we expand this on a world scale, I've been talking about non-Western cities. You have large parts of Western cities that are increasingly in crisis. You have large communities in Western cities that need to find new forms of collaboration, both online and offline. And I think we need to come up, the intellectual property regime is completely bankrupt today. It's completely bankrupt. It's unsustainable and bankrupt. We need to come up with new forms of collaboration through which innovation can take place, and collaboration and critical recognition of each other can take place. And I think the examples of the last 30 years, at least from the South, and probably all over the world, have shown us that another way is possible, not in the ad slogan of a presidential campaign, but another way is possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Thank you very much, Ravi. It's a very illuminating perspective. I'll just pass the microphone over to Moitrey, who will give us another example of this other possible world in actual existence, actually existing alternatives.
Thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. For my PhD dissertation, I'm looking at markets in Delhi. So it's kind of a continuity of the work that Ravi has done before, because he has looked at cassette culture. And after that, we also had a boom in video games and, console games. So I basically look at the same markets, but dealing with a different electronic product. And it takes the same entry point of piracy, because most of the games available in these markets are not original, they are actually counterfeited, fake games, and most of them are of copyright violation. However, when I did my field study in 3 markets in Delhi, I could see that although there is a broader frame of illegality, because they are not going by the laws of intellectual property rights, in the ground level, the innovation is also dependent on other factors. Like what is at the ground level, there is actually a hierarchy. So when there is a market of just pirated computer games, which is the most basic kind of, because I think now if gamers are here in this room, people have shifted to consoles and Xbox, like PlayStation. Computer games is still a niche audience. So within a very rudimentary market, it depends on also the seller and their knowledge. If they're illiterate themselves, they're not able to innovate to a great extent. So their innovation, which for us probably won't even be an innovation, because we would think we are very naturally acclimatized to a digital language now. But for them, even installation is an innovation because they never had seen computer before. So it's only in the market that they get introduced to what a computer is. And they don't understand the language of it. So how they do it is just to memorize forms. So they will memorize the spelling, you know, but they won't understand what it means. So it's like a very practical approach to the functioning of the computer. But in another market where the retail market of games is deals with, you know, all kinds of video games, we have a more sophisticated innovation circuit even in the informal market scenario. So there are repair person and there are traders who can jailbreak PlayStation, which is like, I think, everywhere now, because PlayStations usually do not play outdated games. So it becomes very interesting when they can actually crack into PlayStation. So what happens is that you can, if you have an older installation of PlayStation, you can also use it to play newer games. So, so in a market where there is this kind of circuit, you also have, like in Ravi showed, the loop of, you know, transnational, especially with China, Russia. There is a lot of exchange, not just of information, but also of tools like chips, which are hacked chips used to actually get into the PlayStation and make it run different kind of DVDs. If I can have the images. Yeah. The final market that I looked on is not a retail market, but a wholesale market, which is basically a market which deals with sending out lumps of goods to different people around the country, and specifically not just to metro, but to local markets. So here the innovation is at another level, because they are actually not playing any of the games that probably mainstream gamers are playing. They're still playing very archaic games, like if you remember, like Atari, Sega, like very old games. So what they do is, like, this is something, they use the Sega, the IC board, and then they fix it to the next slide. Yeah, so what they do is use a big TV monitor and they fix the IC board to the TV. And finally, we have the next slide. Something like this. So they actually build a big screen, a parlor game machine. And what that does is, like, you get to play like very basic Taken, Super Mario on a big, almost like an LCD experience, to a very different kind of mass. So what I found interesting is that there is not one singular way in which legality or illegality plays out in this plane, because they're constantly using different kind of reputation techniques to show themselves that they are actually not illegal, because that's always put them into danger. But one thing which is interesting is that they have no notion of creativity, you know? Creativity is a discourse which is, I think, a very classist discourse. I mean, it's a bad word to use, but because they think that what they're doing is copying and cheating, it's vulgar. So there's no self-awareness of what that knowledge is. But as a sociologist, when I come back from the field, I realize that they are doing most of the things that open source and, you know, commons and public domain are using, which is like knowledge sharing. Like when you share knowledge, they are not asking for money in the market. Everything is available in the collective domain. But they don't speak that language. And what is most interesting is, they, even though in practice they do the alternate to knowledge kind of dimension, in theory, they have a moral narrative of a very IPR regime. So they think that, okay, we are not doing the right thing, we shouldn't be doing this. So I would just end with the thing that everything is in a flux. And given so much of contradiction, I think a politics has not emerged yet. And I'm hoping that in the coming days, these people are able to legitimize their claim to a certain very interesting form of public sharing and collaborative knowledge, and let's see what happens in the coming times. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Moitrey. So what we can get from these two speakers, I think, is that there is actually an existing alternative information society, right? Something that is not based on intellectual property, something that is based on a much more diffuse bricolage style innovation and development, the sort of a bazaar mode of production, which is actually already now giving access to information technology to a large part of the world's population. Just a short example before I pass over to the other speakers. Ravi, you mentioned the Shanzhai networks. Shanzhai networks in China are, as Ravi said, these component manufacturers that make motherboards and chips for Apple, Samsung, etc., which in the recent years have put themselves together in innovation networks very similar to the networks that you have talked about, to develop cell phones on their own, which are sometimes clones of Apple's or Samsung, sometimes more innovative products, both in quirky aesthetic ways and in technological ways. And I read a couple of months ago that right now Shanzhai smartphones cover about 30% of the world's smartphone market. Right? So a Shanzhai smartphone costs about $30 on a market in China, on a market in Bangkok, or a market in Egypt. So if you want to talk about the Twitter revolution, which in itself is wrong because it wasn't the Twitter revolution, but the people who tweeted from Tahrir Square in Egypt probably to a very large extent tweeted from Shanzhai phones, right? So these are the phones that give people in the Middle East and give people in Africa access to Twitter, to the internet, to the information technology. So of course this is a pirate modernity that has very important political implication also at the sort of the geopolitical level in many ways. Okay, so with that, I'd like to pass over to the hacker perspective, if I'm allowed to use this. Single signifier. So please, Jaromil.
Your presentations, really, I can be pretty short now. And it's often very difficult to give people in the Western world an idea in the North, an idea of what is happening out there, because we often think of normative approaches to the liberties of the digital, and we try to enforce old schemes, but we actually don't have a clue that out there everything is happening already and it's flourishing, and then there are just like these short comments, oh, of course the BRICS are the future, but no one has an idea of what it looks like. And when you get into there, then our programmed, sanitized approach shuts our eyes down, and we are not able to see beyond what we really find in the street. So my intervention is more theoretical at this point. You saved me the hard work, and I'd like to, because also in a recent interview that Carola published on Wired, I talk about ethics, and I think it's a pretty difficult word, and I'm not sure I'm prepared to actually talk about that, but I tried. And I did referring to the last formulation of the ethics of the system in which we live in, that I most respect, is the one of Max Weber, the one that refers to a certain change in religious beliefs and also in printed press. So what we are witnessing now is a different, it's a new evolution, is a new iteration, if you like. And within this iteration, of course, piracy is a space that that led us also, if we look into it, let us understand more. We are talking about the biggest economies in the world. It's so embarrassing. I've been involved in the Bitcoin project to see how much money actually flows from gray to black markets, right on as there is one little crack in the system. There are people that survive, families that survive, like cities that survive on economies that are not normed. They cannot be contemplated. They can't be computed. We can't compute them. And on the other side, we go on with this like computationalist approach, because it's the only rationality that was provided to our governments to act with. Sometimes I say we are at the end of capitalism, and maybe we are the transformation of it. The fact is that the old rationality that put capitalism in place is driving to an end. I'd like to look on how capitalism came, first of all. So you find a pretty good account in the book Anti-Oedipus by Gilles Deleuze and Guattari that identifies the birth of capitalism in actually breaking the codes, the codified culture, the caste system. The dream that we all had and still have is that everyone can be anyone, the American dream. That is what we went on. We built an axiomatic approach to value and to actually being. So anyone can be anyone, can become anyone, as long as you have the money for it. The money was the main medium to actually measure this axiomatic approach. And we went on and on by actually substituting people with numbers. Georg Simmel, one of the best philosophers of the 1900s, of the short century, that talk about money, arrived to state that man became an indirect being, that actually money is the object, is the medium that connects us to the realization of our desires. And in this situation, we are now, you show us pretty well with the general sentiment discourse that we are trying to quantify the very desires and the very emotions that are online and find something useful for our computation machines in the financial market. A financial market that is also crashing, that is also absolutely irrational. The flash crash and more flash crashes will happen, and people don't even know what is happening in there. And we are starting to get entangled into the complexity of this numerical, axiomatic system. So one thing is the pulsion to just go back and recodify our lives, just like you're the son or daughter of this man or this woman, and then you must do the same job that they ever did. And this is an approach that is pretty primitivist and would try to step back. And the other approach, the one that invents new rationalities and new forms of liberation, it's the piracy approach. So we must look into a future without imposing the schemes of a system that already exists, and with an open heart to what, and eyes and abdomen, why not, to what happens now, the discussion about the pulsions and the markets, how we mercify the bodies of people, how that has actually an influence on the very existence of fundamentalism. And I think I look forward to this debate now.
Okay. So I have some slides, so if you want to show the first one. Oh, okay, I can change it. Okay, great. Thank you. So I wanted I didn't know how to fit my work into this panel, so I wanted to start from the word piracy, what a pirate is in our societies. My work is on the life sciences, so biology and biomedicine. And in that field, piracy was, this word piracy was just describe bad companies, evil companies that were privatizing and enclosing life. Monsanto is a very well-known example, of course. So biopiracy, biopirates would go to a developing country, patenting a gene, they would patent a gene, and they would privatize it and prevent people from using it, right? Do you recognize this narrative? So they would create artificial scarcity. Something that is abundant in nature, genes will be artificial so that they could sell it. But something is changing. Of course, we're having a panel on pirate modernity. We're not talking about Monsanto. The rate of patents is declining in the life sciences. It's not as profitable as it used to be for several reasons. Litigations, lots of trials, lots of money going to the lawyers, of course. Sentences, like very important sentence from the American Supreme Court that restricted, let's say, the way in which patents can be used to protect genes just a few months ago. So I think that piracy now doesn't say anything about scarcity, artificial scarcity, but it's more about abundance. That's about surplus that needs not to be enclosed, but to be managed and controlled and shared, of course. So I'm going to give you two very arbitrary examples from my book, very different examples. So one is a mainstream biologist, a guy working like a top level in the life sciences industry, and another one is a bottom-up, do-it-yourself community. So we can, oh no, I can switch the slide. Yeah, I don't know if you know Craig Venter. He is a very important and famous American biologist. He became, let's say, famous and hated and portrayed as the bad boy of biology, or Darth Venter instead of Darth Vader, because he left the public sector and he started his own company based on patenting and enclosing genes. So he got into this race with the public Human Genome Project and kind of won this race, or at least they published the human genome sequence together. And after that enterprise, there were even demonstrations with posters with his picture, demonstrations against biopiracy, privatization of life. So in this case, I chose it also because it's a ship, it's a pirate ship maybe. He sailed the world seas with this ship called the Sorcerer II, the Sorcerer II, basically reenacting Darwin's voyage around the world, so stopping in the Galapagos and so on, and sampling the water, filtering bacteria, sequencing their genomes, and in order to find genes which sequence for interesting proteins, useful for basically synthetic biology projects in order to produce biofuel, for example, or hydrogen. So in this case, he put everything on a public database. Everything was open access. For the first time, he switched to an open science model. So he decided not to enclose his data, his information, but to share it with everybody. And with this very important rhetoric of sharing, everybody is going to be able to access this data from her own desktop. Okay. So for the first time, some accusations of biopiracy came for a guy who was actually sharing and not patenting. Why? Because this project was anyway for profit. It wasn't intended as a liberal, ideal project based on an ideal of justice, for example. It was just intended as a new business model. It showed an ability to collect capitals from different actors, foundations, media, Google, for example, public agencies, and so on. So in this case, I think it shows that basically new business models based on sharing and then selling services instead of information are emerging in life sciences as well. This is pretty common in the IT world, right? The second example is completely different. It's a community called Do-It-Yourself Biology. So in this case, it's basically a network of communities that are opening community labs all over the world, especially in North America and Asia, and somewhere in Europe as well. And they portray themselves as pirate, do-it-yourself, punk, hacker, and so on. So it's a very different image of what a pirate can do in the life sciences today. So what they do is to set up these community labs that are accessible to anybody. You don't need to have a PhD. You don't need to work in a big institution such as a university or a big pharma company, right? To go and experiment with them. And of course, they work in a hacker modality. So. Well, they also exploit this abundance I'm talking about. So databases that are open, so the free flow of data coming from open access databases, scrap tools that they can steal or buy for little money from old labs, open source tools that they're buying, that they're designing. Skills, of course, that are abundant and diffused. So people who are studying, people who have IT skills and want to apply that to biology. In this case, of course, sharing is as the center of the discourse, but also opposition to institutions. And they don't want to be commanded by academic institutions or industrial institutions. Opposite to Venter, their scientific level, of course, is kind of low. So nothing very interesting is coming out of those communities from the scientific level, but we never know. What is interesting is the fact that they are criticizing, let's say, big bio, big bio, in new ways related to the hacker cultures. Something similar to Venter is that he also keeps on saying that he wants to do whatever type of science he wants without having to respond to any corporate or academic chain of command. Okay? So in both cases, piracy means sharing and refusal of bureaucracies. So very different examples, but I think that they're interesting because they show how open science and piracy in the life science can have a very different meaning with respect to the first example, so the old example maybe. It can mean to open new spaces of autonomy, but also to open new markets. So in this case, I think that this work kind of resonates with the main issue at stake in this panel, because maybe what these new forms of piracy, of punk biology or of shared and open biology, could envision a new life sciences system in which several forms of property coexist. So patenting coexists with sharing. It really depends on the business model you want to enact. Sharing coexists with secrecy. It really depends on the kind of environment in which you perform an experiment. So just to wrap up, I think we live in interesting times. I don't know if those examples that can be kind of marginal in a way. Of course, this example is marginal. I don't know where they're going to go, what's going to spring out of them. But I think that what's interesting is that they're breaking the code of biology in new ways. Not breaking the code of DNA, but breaking the code of the system of biology. So in this sense, what is possible we see is a new ecology in the life sciences industry in which private and public actors and also autonomous actors could coexist and work together or work against each other maybe. Of course, this is because of digitalization of DNA code, and not only DNA code, but of scientific information. So maybe pirate modernity in the life sciences could have a sense, could have a meaning similar to what we see in Shanzhai and in the street markets in India. Thank you.
I don't know if it's okay, so thanks, and thanks to my co-panelists for the very interesting presentations. I should say that I will have a presentation, we can say that is a bit more institutional in one sense, in the sense that I will present some of the activities that we are doing in the frame of the European Physical Society and that are devoted to the development. First of all, I want to just spot that European Physical Society is quite linked and very strongly linked with the Institute of Physics and the ICTP in Trieste, in Italia, that is the International Center for Theoretical Physics. So let me just give you some frame about the development and the cooperation for development. At least I hope not to oversimplify all the topics, but essentially when we are speaking about the cooperation for development, we are speaking about huge stuff, about something that put together a lot of different activities, sometimes even contradictory activities, and that could be summarized in three main frames. So the first one is the cooperation for development that concerns the big infrastructures. So actually is the project that often on the TV, on the press, we'll hear about financed about the World Bank, about big institutions like European Commissions and so on. And then there is the emergency. So that is a big part of the cooperation on development. So in the sense that sometimes there are big immediate crises in developing countries, and this crisis should be faced immediately. So you cannot stand for waiting for a big bureaucratic process to give some help. So everybody, actually the emergencies, and I should say sadly, the emergencies are the activities that catch the news immediately. So each time that you have an earthquake in developed country or an Ebola crisis in Congo, immediately there is a press launch, but at the same time there are activities that need a quick response. And then there is another big frame that is what is called the capacity building. So the capacity building is what hopefully we want to do in the frame of physics for development, as long as many ONGs and also institutions like, for example, the European Commission. So capacity buildings essentially respond to some sort of non-equilibrium thermodynamic principle that is valid probably also in communities. And this principle is that whenever you have some sort of gradient, it means a difference between one point and the other. In some way, this difference pushes a flow that could be of wealth, money, coins, or could be of people, could be of knowledge, could be of wherever. So if we want not to stop the flow, but to alter this kind of, we can say, relation between the poorest and the richest, we have a different way. So one way that is probably the easiest one is to just put frontiers, just put the border. You cut the flow, avoiding that the others could just wave along it. That is, for example, the problem sometimes of immigrations. There is also another way. There is another way. It means that you have to smooth out the gradient. So try to reduce the differences, or at least try to reduce the attractiveness of the difference, and so try to keeping people in enriching the country, enriching stay, but especially create a different relationship with the others. In economic terms, we can say that the richness in the third development, in the underdeveloped country, should become some sort of commodity, something that they could exchange, and so they could have a peer relationship with the other. So again, how to smooth out this gradient? There are again two, we can say, ways. So the first one is to make the richest poorest. This is one of the ways. Or on the other way around, of trying to increase, we can say, the poorest to try to catch up with the richest. And everybody, I mean, quite all the studies that are done by official agencies like United Nations spot that the robustness of a country to the crisis, to the shake of the crisis, is essentially related to their capacity of innovation. So essentially the innovation that is not, I will speak essentially about scientific innovation, but is also an innovation like a social innovation, it's a personal innovation. So the problem is that if you want to create a robustness, so a capacity to respond to threat in a country, and this is very important for developing country, you should give them some sort of innovation, so to make them strong. And so now I will switch on what, for example, in research you can do, because a big problem of developing country is not, for example, in theoretical stuff. I have a lot of colleagues of mine that in Africa, even without any means, are able to publish in Natures, in Langmuir. I don't know if you are quite used to hear about this name, but are very, very ranked scientific journal. But what they lack is essentially the material. If you want to do research, scientific research, sometimes you need equipment that is a very costly equipment. So how to respond to their needs? So how to give equipment that allow them to do also an applied research. I don't want to criticize theoretical research, but you can also easily understand that often in developing countries the problem is about a material progress. So they need mainly applied science. And everybody, I mean, I don't know if someone of you works in the scientific field, and everybody knows that these materials cost enormously for different reasons, because we have to follow some laws, some security check, sometimes even not so justified. And so the price is increasing exponentially year over year. So how to try to overcome this costly, we can say, bottleneck in developing country? So the idea, of course, is recycling. And there is, again, different way. So recycling could be just take an old PC and throw in Africa, so in a developing country. But there is also another way that is what we are doing in the frame of our activity. So to amount what is, we can say, old, and not necessarily to rebuild the same in Africa, but to use the components to build brand new instruments that could have the same performances of much more costly equipment in the developed world. So we are following, if you can change, is 2 slides, more. So the second one, this is one of the inspirators of this kind of politics, we can say, George Whitesides, where he spot is an Harvard professor, that he spot that actually when you want to enhance this kind of country, you should take into account that you need the minimal infrastructure if you want to create a difference, and you should put the elegance of the creativity at the service of these activities. And so, recycling. Recycling is really some sort of a creative activity that can be beneficial in 2 senses. First of all, you can have a brand new instrument. So we assembled in Africa with the help of a local university a multispectral microscopes that help for the detection, the easy detection of malaria, in front of a theoretical cost of more or less $50,000 for $500, just taking LEDs from CD and other stuff, and creatively going back to the physical principles that are at the base of these instruments and reassemble differently. So this is what is important. And the second aspect is essentially that if they have instruments in their hands, their research will become a commodity. It's a bad term, I know, but it means that they can exchange with the others something, and it's like internet, in the sense that the data are, I'm not an expert, so excuse me if I am completely wrong, but essentially is when data becomes something that you can exchange, that had values. So you can be rich only if you have created, you have assembled with your own creativity, something that at the end you can say, okay, I will do our research, I will publish, and the other guy in the developed country said, oh, why I should pay $100,000 if I can do this with 2,000? So developing countries are in a bad situations, but as usually, the period of crisis are very, we can say, are period also of big, huge opportunities. And so these activities of recycling, we can say intelligently, not just to throw all the stuff in developing country, is the initiative that me and the group of the European Physical Society are pushing in this sense, we can say, of the piracy, we can say.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlo. So I'm going to ask Alex Giordano to open up the debate and the discussion, and after that we have about 40 minutes for debate and discussion, and I welcome all of you to intervene and to ask questions to our panelists. If you feel like asking questions in Italian, that's perfectly okay. Alessandro perhaps will translate and make sure that the communication is flowing. So with that, please, Alex.
Il telecomando, sì, no, mi interessa soprattutto stimolare i ragazzi al dibattito. Vi ringrazio per essere a corsi numerosi per un discorso che ne valeva la pena di fare. E davvero vorrei ringraziare l'organizzazione dell'Internet Festival, perché oltre ai nostri grandi ospiti, appunto, che dall'India ci hanno portato delle testimonianze preziose, sono davvero felice, orgoglioso e anche, come dire, sentimentalmente appunto orgoglioso di avere 3 testimonianze di 3 grandi eccellenze che sono Jaromil, Carlo e Alessandro, che dico nel mondo, come avete visto, stanno facendo tantissimo da anni su questi fronti, e sono per noi che ci onoriamo di essere in maniera umile dei subcompagni, diciamo, di ricerca, in maniera pratica, a volte anche solo ideale. Siamo contenti quando fuori anche dall'ovvio, appunto, c'è la possibilità di avere queste testimonianze. Come vedete, sono testimonianze di porosità, cioè fatte di, ancora una volta, di passaggi fluidi, liquidi, tra ambiti anche apparentemente diversi e lontani, ed è un po' tutto il lavoro che stiamo cercando di fare con il gruppo di ricerca informale, perché altrimenti non potrebbe essere sul Societing. E velocemente vi faccio vedere un paio di cose che ci hanno portato qui. Noi abbiamo cominciato con loro da qualche anno, diciamo, questo percorso di ricerca. Vi faccio vedere un breve video al volo.
L'economia corporate è in crisi. È ormai sempre più evidente che per sopravvivere il sistema deve cambiare radicalmente. Il problema più grande non è una scarsità di idee, né di proposte concrete, e neanche di persone disposte ad impegnarsi per un cambiamento concreto. Quello che manca è un nuovo modello organizzativo, una nuova filosofia di impresa che sia capace di capitalizzare queste risorse e di dar loro una nuova direzione. Il processo produttivo si svolge sempre di più al di fuori delle mura della fabbrica, coinvolgendo consumatori, risorse comuni come l'open source software, comunità di innovazione a cui appartengono esperti amatori, fornitori e anche competitor, e i membri del nuovo pubblico della rete, che crea reputazione e nuove forme di brand. Societing costituisce un nuovo modo di fare impresa e una nuova concezione del valore, che siano adatti ad una nuova situazione produttiva e alle nuove sfide che ci aspettano. Crediamo che costruire una nuova sfera pubblica di questo tipo possa portare a una migliore connessione tra economia e società, una maggiore coerenza tra ciò che è socialmente desiderabile e ciò che ha valore economico. Il Societing è un tentativo di assecondare la socializzazione dei processi produttivi con una nuova filosofia di impresa che riconosca il ruolo sempre più attivo dei consumatori e degli altri stakeholder e che si apre a una loro partecipazione attiva anche nella determinazione del valore della ricchezza prodotta. Societing Reloaded è curato da Adam Arvidsson e Alex Giordano e ospita i contributi di alcuni dei più interessanti attori del pensiero contemporaneo.
Questo era lo spot del libro che è uscito, ma ci interessava farvi vedere il nostro punto di vista, proprio perché tra l'altro questo libro è null'altro che un quaderno degli appunti di queste esperienze che grazie a questo gruppo stiamo portando avanti da qualche anno. E da qualche anno, appunto, quando abbiamo cominciato ad interrogarci, no, sulle possibilità offerte da una cultura che era quella che ci apparteneva, la cultura appunto della filosofia Haking, della pirateria vista in un certo modo. E quando abbiamo cominciato a capire se questo, quanto potesse rappresentare una fonte di stimoli, no, per salvarci un po' dal fallimento del presente, abbiamo deciso di metterci a fare degli incontri, a incontrarci informalmente, quindi abbiamo cominciato a fare queste summer school e dove abbiamo passato notti e giorni, no, a parlare tanto, a indagare nuovi modelli possibili con tanti carissimi amici, Michel Bowens, Jaromil, John Grant che è qui tra di noi, Bill Emmott. Abbiamo passato un po' di anni per capire quale potesse essere appunto l'approccio sistemico giusto, no? Partendo dalla nostra post-ideologia. Abbiamo cominciato a organizzare giù in Campania, e io, visto il mio accento, solo di questo vi posso parlare oggi, degli incontri con Arduino, cioè a fare, diciamo, divulgare, no? quello che noi abbiamo chiamato squatting Campania, cioè a un certo punto abbiamo visto che si muoveva un certo filone legato all'innovazione, eccetera, abbiamo cominciato a entrare dentro questi meccanismi portando dentro contenuti, se vogliamo, altri, presi da settori che non apparentemente erano visti soltanto come underground o, come dire, per roba da scoppiati, diciamo, l'abbiamo portati nelle università, abbiamo cominciato a vedere quello che succedeva sul territorio. La cosa interessante è che abbiamo visto che c'era una via, allora qual era il nostro pensiero? Ma quindi tutto questo, c'è una via pirata anche per noi meridionali, per noi campani, per noi topi di campagna, era un po' questo il... E abbiamo visto che c'era già tantissimo, c'erano tanti giovani, no, che univano la volontà di fare una vita legata alle loro tradizioni, alle loro identità, ma non per questo privandosi delle opportunità e delle conoscenze che l'essere oggi un giovane cosmopolita, no, ti possono portare. Quindi molti di loro hanno fatto delle esperienze anche all'estero, hanno studiato, hanno occupato centri sociali, si sono occupati di software libero. Tornando a casa c'era la necessità di far convivere queste due istanze. E allora ci siamo detti, dopo un po' di anni di riflessioni teoriche, di capire se poteva essere il modo per passare alla pratica lavorando su queste istanze. Quindi quest'estate abbiamo fatto una summer school un po' diversa, con un gruppo di ragazzi eccellenti, alcuni di voi sono qui con noi, abbiamo costruito, quindi abbiamo co-realizzato questo progetto di Rural Hub. Cioè abbiamo pensato quanto potesse essere utile un posto che mettesse insieme queste competenze, quindi facesse appunto da hub tra tutti questi giovani che aderivano, no, a questo stile di vita, se vogliamo, rurale, neorurale, però diciamo sempre noi, non soltanto con la zappa, ma anche mettendoci tutto il loro bagaglio culturale. È stato bellissimo perché abbiamo costruito un'aula magna, per prima cosa, per poterlo fare. L'abbiamo dovuta poi riempire di persone interessanti e di contenuti. Come vedete con Nicola Cerantola abbiamo parlato di business model, abbiamo preso strumenti vecchi e nuovi, no, per poterci aiutare. E con Jacopo abbiamo parlato di open source ecology, quindi abbiamo indagato la possibilità con questo grandioso progetto, no, anche di poter realizzare con dei progetti open messi online tutte le attrezzature tecnologiche che servono per l'agricoltura, che non necessariamente devono essere acquistate, no, diciamo, dai grandi produttori. C'è un progetto per realizzare questo trattore che con 4.000 euro di materiali, Jacopo correggimi se sbaglio, un po' di più, quant'era? Ah sì, $13.000 di materiali, però contro un costo molto più alto, no, pensando poi anche di che farci, vi dico di queste cose. Questi sono sempre i nostri, questi Arduino per la campagna. E quindi insieme abbiamo generato, quindi ecco, con la guida anche di Simone Cicero, no, che ci ha fatto da, direi, maestro di cerimonia, no, facilitatore per dei processi quindi di design thinking, e comunque insieme con Simone e con tutti questi ragazzi abbiamo realizzato questo Rural Hub. Questo abbiamo preso questa ex agriturismo e l'abbiamo trasformato in un primo luogo fisico e anche virtuale, una rete dove poter dare uno spazio proprio di co-working, co-living e di scambio di esperienza tra tutta una serie di ragazzi che abbiamo individuato in Campania, in Italia e nel mondo, che stanno praticamente decidendo di cambiare la loro vita, ritornare, no, all'agricoltura con questi approcci. E addirittura a Pisa ieri abbiamo fatto un Investor Day, parlando sempre della necessità di far incontrare cose diverse. Abbiamo portato tutti questi neo-agricoltori di fronte a dei venture capital, immaginate un po'. È stato all'inizio divertente questo incontro ieri, però alla fine vi posso assicurare che sono andati via tutti contenti di aver imparato qualcosa gli uni dagli altri, cioè anche il fatto stesso che esistono, e per noi questo è importante, la testimonianza delle immaginazioni diverse è già importante, cioè quindi far emergere un immaginario alternativo. E quindi faremo tutta una cosa adesso parte una serie di iniziative con Arduino, faremo questi corsi di Arduino per la ruralità. Abbiamo intercettato questi ragazzi in Texas che con Arduino e pezzi di computer dismesso organizzano materiali per gestire le serre. Lo stesso progetto di open source ecology, come vi dicevo, dà la possibilità di autocostruirsi attrezzature, però queste attrezzature, perché no, possono essere anche condivise, non necessariamente ognuno di noi deve costruirsi un trattore. Nel lab ce ne possono essere tot a disposizione tra i membri della, diciamo, della comunità. Quindi era questa un po' la provocazione che stiamo lanciando in questi giorni all'Internet Festival, cioè di come è importante poi trovare sempre imparare, no, da questi segnali direi non più deboli, anzi forti, no, della contemporaneità, però unendoli comunque a un genus loci italiano. A noi ci sembrava interessante la prospettiva della modernità pirata perché supera, secondo noi, quella molto in voga dei makers oggi, no, dove il rischio è quello di tirare fuori un'altra ondata consumistica, cioè è ancora quello che ci vede cittadini consumatori, cioè mi compro la ennesima stampante 3D e un altro gadget per a casa per stamparmi, non lo so, i portachiavi. Non è quello, voglio dire, la cosa interessante quanto quello che stiamo vedendo, cioè quanto si possono contaminare questi approcci e quindi superare la barriera dell'istituzionale come dell'underground. Cioè, avete visto quanto sono simili i lavori. Sono miei due cari amici, sia Jaromil che Carlo, li conosco su due binari diversi, però da sempre ho visto che si sono occupati anche di cose analoghe, faccio riferimento anche ai progetti tuoi, Jaromil, passati, fatti in giro per il mondo. Quindi c'era già un link. E niente, quindi questa è la provocazione, era quello che vi lancio e di chiedervi quanto nel vostro quotidiano una modernità pirata, così come ce l'hanno descritta, aiuta e favorisce uno sviluppo positivo e virtuoso. Fatto questo, vedrete come ogni giorno cambieranno i vostri punti di vista e anche azioni, no? Come pratiche definite pratiche illegali. No? Pensate, sono stato per una consulenza alla Federazione delle etichette musicali e il tema era come ci dobbiamo salvare dall'illegalità, della pirateria, del download. Sono entrato e ho fatto una domanda, ho detto, signori, ok, c'erano 40 operatori, quanti di voi hanno mai scaricato un pezzo su internet o visto qualcosa su YouTube? Nessuno ha alzato la mano. Dite la verità? No? Dove? Ah, sì.
Non avevi finito, scusa.
Allora nessuno aveva alzato la mano, ho detto dite la verità, 2 o 3 timidamente hanno alzato la mano, ho detto dite la verità, alla fine tutti, ma come in questa stanza, penso ognuno di voi almeno una volta nella vita per sbaglio, che poi si è andato a confessare, diciamo, ha visto un video su YouTube. Questo è per dire che finché continueremo a considerare delle pratiche illegali, quelli che sono in realtà delle pratiche evolutive, cioè un problema nasce con la fotocopiatrice, non con internet, insomma, non ci potremo mai svincolare, no, da una evoluzione virtuosa. Ci sono domande nel pubblico? Ecco qua. Volevi dire una cosa.
So first, one thing I'd like to say, I see there's a couple of people outside the room, so there are a couple of seats up front if you want to come in and get closer to the line. All right, so thank you very much for this, Alex, and we have one question over here, I understand. Yes, please.
Biopirateria, immagino che sia comunque un concetto in evoluzione anche di piuttosto recente uscita, e in che modo la biopirateria si può legare alla social innovation, cioè se è uno step, diciamo, propedeutico, cioè è qualcosa di necessario poi alla social innovation, oppure può viaggiare su 2 binari paralleli, se c'è una sequenzialità o meno. Grazie.
A more stringent definition of biopiracy. I'll probably pass the microphone to Alessandro and then Jaromil for that. And if I could ask you to keep to the English, that'd be great. Thank you.
So, I mean, I decided to use piracy to define that messy word today because I wanted to fit into the pirate modernity idea. Usually it's defined biohacking or do-it-yourself biology. I think those terms could overlap, or we could discuss for days about which one will be better, but I think they overlap a little bit. So we're talking about something made like in the wild, so outside the doors of scientific institutions. And of course, it's immersed in a dense environment of innovation, which includes pharmaceutical companies, I mean, traditional actors such as pharmaceutical companies and universities, but also new actors such as startups that try to make their way using an open science approach, and different actors such as, for example, search engines, like Google, for example. So there are, of course, new actors that are trying to see whether this huge availability of data, also in the life sciences and not only in the computer sciences, can be used in order to produce value in different ways in the open, let's say. So, of course, there are companies that are trying to use social innovation in that sense, mobilizing patients, for example, willingness to share not only their genetic information but also their health history, for example, right? So yeah, I would say that yes, of course, it's a very messy environment when it comes to do-it-yourself biology, but then it's immersed in a more I want to say concrete environment of companies that are trying to build new models. Again, some of those companies are kind of marginal, some are more important and are actually establishing something that from the economic viewpoint is probably sustainable. We'll see.
I'd like to make a step back before diving in head first, because I feel that we are leaving some people behind. First of all, you, and then also some people in the audience. I think there is a kind of linguistic negotiation going on. And while we are trying to talk about concepts that require a more intimate inner work on the expansion of your consciousness to understand the phenomena we are talking about, on the other side, there is a cultural negotiation with the system in place, in this very place, Italy, part of Europe, you know, the part that is probably being left behind what you really know. So on one side, we contemplate new systems of production. On the other side, we try to conjugate them into words like capital, working capital, like, you know, in the logic of profit. You must understand that in this land, the industrial vision and the scientific vision is overly present. Maybe Europe is lost in this. You know, Husserl has still something to tell us. But the point that we are making, I think, is constructing a common, or if you like, uncommon ground. So I invite all the listeners to actually try to understand and dissect this linguistic negotiation that we are witnessing.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Yes, please, John. Please use the microphone. It's for streaming purposes.
Sorry, I'm not sure it will address the last point made, but I'm very interested in, because there is a divide between some of the spaces explored by different speakers and the same term, and it's interesting. And I wanted to explore if there's a potential for a term between the pirates and the Navy. In the British Navy, we had a pirate government, so we had pirates working for the Navy called pirateers. I saw a presentation from an EU policy person 2 years ago of a piece of research that said it takes 30 years too long to recognize health risks. This was true of cigarettes and safety belts. It's probably currently true of GM and Ready Roundup and birth defects. And it may be true of mobile phones. And she said the reason is that the scientific paradigm doesn't regard the questions that are asked by isolated researchers as a valid question. And there are extremes where they get legally attacked or you know, treated very badly, and there are extremes in that, but mostly it doesn't seem to me like a simple conspiracy where the corporate money doesn't support the research, but there is just not the scientific paradigm at the moment to explore whether, for instance, phones give you brain cancer. And I wondered if the new forms of scientific research outside those paradigms offered the possibility of, for instance, saving lives 30 years earlier.
So can alternative approaches to scientific research address problems and issues that the scientific establishment
does it have to live in the
do?
informal world, or can it actually affect the main paradigm?
I think I'll give that microphone to Alessandro.
Maybe I am in the audience, more closely involved to science, in the sense that I'm just operating. So the question, as I can see at it, is that in fact, in this kind of, we can say, relationship between science and whatever could be institutions or also society, there is a different approach that is a characteristic time to response. And so it's difficult to put together what is felt like dangerous and what is, we can say, proved to be dangerous. And so this sometimes create big discrepancies in the evaluation of threats, or even in the non-evaluation of the positive aspects. So it's always been a common trend in the scientific, we can say, evolution, but also in these, we can say, dialogues between social and scientific, we can say, truth, that sometimes society has anticipated science, sometimes science has just driven society with her, but it's rarely the situation has been put together in some sort in a synchronous matter. So I can understand that sometimes, because I'm living in Brussels, so I know more or less how the EU policy is working. And if I have well understood, is also something related with the precaution principle and other stuff that is pushed a lot by the European Union. But this is something that also is difficult to judge, in the sense that when declaring a precaution principle, practically you are not fixing the threshold. And this means that you create a completely, we can say, divergence between what is a threshold for the science, what is a threshold for the society. So this is the opinion. So it's very difficult to think about putting together something that has a characteristic time that is in one case based on the feeling that could be a powerful means to understand what is happening, and others that try to translate this feeling in something that is, we can say, a method. And up to now, I am doing science since 20 years, more or less. I really have, and I am quite, we can say, I can feel this kind of problem for common people to understand why a scientist sometimes do not understand what is self-evident. But I don't think that is so easy to put together. So the only possibility that I can say as a scientist is that the dialogues, the networking, to know what the other is doing and the other reason, could help to smooth out this kind of discrepancies, but could not be imposed as a general matter. I don't know, I don't think that a new paradigm could be created really to put together the stuff.
Thank you. I'd like to invite some more questions from the audience, if there's something. Yes, please, Eugenio, you need to get the microphone.
Thank you for... Okay. I'd like to make a quick question to our... Okay, sorry. What do you think about net neutrality and the idea that telco companies want to charge more on Web 2.0 in the future, and what we can do as pirates?
Net neutrality, who would like to address that? You should start. Okay.
I think neutrality is an extremely important concept, as much as it's probably never totally realizable, because when we are talking about the digital, we are talking about a territory. And in order to develop anything on it, we need to grant both the people living on it and the people passing through it a neutral treatment. I understand we are not so good at it, because if we look at the real territories, we don't. There were other 40 people dead in the sea today, just at the borders. In the digital, might be easier to grant actual neutrality. And I think that that is important, of course, for business. And maybe also for consciousness.
Ravi?
Yeah, I think, you know, I said this a day ago, I think this, what I call the Snowden moment, is a fairly constitutive moment in understanding, suddenly understanding how the system has been shaped by very major players in the past decade or so that we didn't know so much. And now I think every day it's unraveling before our eyes. And I think it's a good time. I mean, the last 10 years ago, we were talking about intellectual property. I think it's a good time to discuss the structure of the internet itself. And that's, I think, what is happening at every level. It's happening at every level. It's not just privacy, it's happening at every level. It's not just the state. It's a relationship between state and private capital, which was seen as a far-left slogan. Now, in mainstream newspapers, we are seeing it rolling before our eyes. And I think it's a very interesting time to open up the debate, quite fundamentally and critically. And I think this is the time to do it, because we are living that time. It's not theoretical. We are living that time, for God's sake.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask a question to the panelist that builds on Alex's provocation, and he launched that, in the sense that what came out of this panel was a picture of pirate modernity as essentially a non-Western phenomenon. Right? But of course that's not true, right? Because a lot of these things are going on here as well. They're going on partly through the fact that these types of street markets exist in Italy, they exist in Spain, they exist in Greece, Turkey, Southern Europe, to a larger extent, to other because there's a lot of talk right now about alternative modes of production making inroads also in the West, although those alternative modes of production are not talked about in terms of pirate modernity, but they're talked about within another discourse, a discourse of openness, a discourse of peer-to-peer, and all these sorts of things. But essentially, they're very similar. It's a sort of a collaborative bazaar mode of production, in order to use to refer to a famous book about cathedrals and bazaars that came out in the early 90s, that relies on common resources and with a very strong disrespect for intellectual property rights. And at the same time, we can also see an emerging Chinese economy where this type of bazaar mode of production is perhaps not institutionalized, at least not at the official level, because of course at the official level the Chinese government is very strong about intellectual property right, about institutionalized research, and about traditional forms of R&D systems. But in practice, a lot of the Chinese economy is practicing something quite similar to what you've been discussing as pirate modernity. So I would like to make the microphone go around the panel to have your comments a little bit around the future of that. Are we going to see an ever more influential pirate modernity or bazaar mode of production as a way of satisfying needs and desires also in the West? And how is this going to relate to things like open source design that Alex was talking about, the infamous 3D printers that everybody's been talking about in Italy now for about a year, which I personally don't believe very much in. And finally also, what do you think is going to be the response on the part of the corporate economy to this? Are we going to see strong crackdowns, repression, etc., or are we going to see more collaborative models emerging, right? I mean, one example could be very insightful Danish toy company Lego has already developed innovation communities for Lego toys, right? The Lego Bionicle is essentially a community where kids can go and develop new little figures that can then be translated into Lego toys by the Lego company, but there's no reason for Lego to produce these plastic toys. They can probably be just selling the designs that can then be done in neighborhood workshops or something like that in a possible future, right? So simply put, my question to the panelists is, how do you envision the future of pirate modernity also in the West? how do you think that it will combine with, on the one hand, new technologies like 3D printers and fab labs, etc., and on the other hand, impending resource and energy crisis, etc. And third, what do you think about the existing corporate economy and how it will respond to these things? Who wants to start addressing this? Moitre? Please.
Well, it's an interesting question, but and the way I see it is that probably in the West, I don't know how much this shadow economy is present, because I think piracy or an alternative movement is very stark. It's out there, you know. It's present as an ideology. But the way I see in the South is much more subterranean, because sometimes the state is also in the shadow economy, so they're part of it. So I think maybe in the West, probably the potential is more at the moment as a movement to emerge. And in the South, probably for a time being, it would be quite messy, and it would be very difficult to understand who are the stakeholders in this kind of revolution. But in the coming decades, probably a much more stronger trend of seeing who are the kind of, what kind of movement would actually be seen as profitable. And in that regard, probably the state would also be seeing these alternative modes as much more lucrative.
I want to, you know, one of the things I learned from when I was doing fieldwork and my research is one of the things that made this world